Welcome
Welcome.
to the Forever Classic Podcast. Guys,
Welcome.
it's another weekend, and the game industry keeps on a chugging along despite a lot of setbacks that we saw in the COVID-19 pandemics. So, yeah, this is the Forever Classic Podcast. I'm Alex McCumbers. This is the show that seeks enlightenment through video games, films, and other geek culture. And we have a tendency to stick with games. We've covered some other things in just general geekery here recently that are pretty interesting. And so I guess we'll start this off by saying, welcome to everybody listening at home. And guys, how are you doing? Mr. Zach, how are things?
I am tired today. I just woke up from some nap, but it's been good. We had brunch today, and we've been playing some really fun games.
That's awesome. And we'll get to games here in just a second. But I think what everybody wants an update on is your yard situation. How's the grass?
I've murdered the grass in my driveway. It is dead and
Oh,
not
so
coming
mission
back.
accomplished, huh?
For now, I'm hoping.
I was
So-
listening to I was editing that episode, and those are gonna get out a lot faster as soon as I get some structure to my life, because I'm actually working on some ads with a couple different projects that I'm really excited for. So I really hope that we get to work with them just to promote them. It's not anything that's gonna be paid. It's just a bunch of fun ads, but those are coming soon. So I was editing that episode, and I'm like, we spent a lot of time talking on the grass, and that might be my favorite part of the episode. But Joe, Mr. Joe Simpson, how are you, sir?
Doing overall much better. It seems like everything is greenlit for us to buy a house on October 8th. We were
cool.
waiting on that final appraisal, which kind of determined a lot in terms of whether or not we would get it. Most of it, whether or not it would qualify for the type of loan we were getting, and if there was going to be any repairs necessary to make it qualify. It's being greenlit as is, so there's no repairs that the seller has to do, which is kind of it'd be nice to have some of that stuff taken care of before we moved in, but at the same time, do I want to trust someone who has no investment in this property anymore, just slapping some paint down over something that might need a little bit more attention? So I'd rather almost
you guys are going to
see.
do a lot of that work, right?
Yeah, so it's almost like we would rather be able to see what the things are and then be able to tackle them in our own way. Particularly
Wasn't there a
when
heater situation you were dealing with that you were hoping they would fix?
Yeah, so that was written into our purchase agreement that they would replace the furnace, and that's already been taken care of. That was separate from the appraisal because we had negotiated that before that. So this was anything above and beyond the purchase agreement that would, I guess, according to federal or state guidelines, require the house to qualify for the specific type of loan that we have. We also found out that some of the down payment assistance that we are receiving doesn't have any interest or payments, so we don't owe anything on that, which is going to be super helpful. And in the end,
awesome.
we're going to be paying roughly the same.
That's always good to hear that things are working out for you, because I know that, especially because Zach just went through this recently, and of course I went through a move and I'm renting, which is far different.
Yeah.
But buying a house in America is one of those things that's it's so needlessly stressful for everyone involved, and I hate that is such a waste of everybody's time and efforts, in my opinion.
It's not a straightforward process at all. It's not like you go to the house store and go, yes, I would like to purchase one house, please. There are all these laws and regulations, federal, state, and county and city guidelines that each property has to follow and be a part of.
Yeah.
Different inspections. It'd be nice if you could trust the seller to be forthcoming about issues with the house, but so they get an inspector. But then you should also hire your own inspector so that
it's accurate.
make sure that they're not lying or covering something up. And so it's just this overly complicated thing, and it's pretty stressful because a large portion of it is just the way we've had to go about doing it requires a lot of other extra pieces where other people get to make a decision.
Right.
And but we're happy that things are a little bit more cemented, and we found out that our monthly payment is going to be a bit cheaper than we originally thought, and it's only going to be $40 more than our current rent, which
nice.
So locking that in now is going to be huge for 5-10 years that we're probably going to stay there guaranteed.
Right.
Knowing that our outside of local property taxes, our monthly payment isn't going to change much.
That's really cool, man.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really useful for budgeting. We're tripling the amount of our living space for about the same amount of money per month, which is awesome. I'm going to have an office. We're going to have an extra guest bedroom as well. So all of that's coming together really well. And I'm excited to like do a big reveal of my streaming and video shooting space and office space when
Well,
it's all
much
done.
like how you offered to help me out with this office space, when the time comes, I can always pop over and help you with your office space.
Yeah, that'd
So
be
if you
fun.
wanted to like spend a weekend to paint a room or something, I mean, I'd be down to do that.
Yeah, so once we get into the space, we are going to basically create a list.
Yeah.
I might mock up the room in 3D, so I can
Oh,
quickly
yeah.
like render out various options, which I think might be kind of a cool way to like visualize things.
Yeah, if I had legit drafting software, that's what I wanted to do with
I'm just going to use
everything in my
Blender.
house.
I'm just going to use Blender.
I'm
And
glad you guys understand the manipulation of 3D objects on a software piece. I can't wrap my head around it, but I've never been like taught that sort of thing. So I'm hoping that I'll eventually osmosis those sort of skills the more like game people I hang around.
and
And so
Yeah,
there a
we
little
just
bit
gotta
of
play.
updates. Yeah.
We just gotta play in Blender some, because it took me a long time to like learn how to make the fucking flaming smoking donut and rotate it with different light and stuff. So
Oh yeah.
yeah,
But
I
a
do have the
slight
benefit
update for
of
me, like as far as like trying to find work, I have officially taken on a job at T-Mobile. I should be starting that
nice.
in a day or two. Technically, I've officially accepted a job from Amazon, but I'm waiting to see how the T-Mobile job turns out before I go, okay, because my start day for Amazon's like the 6th or something, so I have like basically a week to figure out if I want to actually like go to the work or whatever. But I
Yeah.
don't know. The other thing I'm doing is I'm doing a little bit of community management actually for a little mobile game, and so that's going pretty well. We're gearing up for certain events and milestones that I think will make the actual process more engaging. But for now, we're just like setting up the foundations, and that whole process of just like interacting with people on social media and figuring out what actual like clients want, like that's really interesting to me. And I'm making some very bad photoshops and edits that are just like horrible, but people react to them, so whatever.
Well,
I
I'm
don't
glad
know.
that's working out for
It's
you.
fun. Yeah. Of course, no money has rolled in yet, and I'll feel far better once that starts coming in. But for now, it's a fun creative exercise.
Nice.
So, guys, what have you been playing in your spare time?
Oh, I gotta think.
We'll start with Zach, I guess.
all right, so definitely been playing Spiritfarer.
Sick.
It took me a while to get like rolling, but now I feel like I'm booking it and I'm starting to run into so many options of things to do that I'm hitting that like what choice? What choice? What choice?
Have you cried yet?
No. But
Mm,
I feel it's getting real close to like super feels because
yeah.
stuff that you'll learn really early in the game. Uh, other than that, we've got a lot of people playing Among Us.
A lot in our Discord server. Like, I spent one weekend playing with like you guys and Paku, and it was super fun. But like since that stream, people have been popping off with Among Us, just like almost nightly games getting together, and you love to see it. Like I love watching people come together to just like hang out in our space because that's why we built it, right? And I really I hope that energy continues into Monster Hunter Rise come March,
Yeah.
Yes.
which is definitely something we'll get to later. Anything else you're playing aside from Among Us and Spiritfarer?
Dabbling with Fortnite with the guys who I have brought over into our Among Us stuff.
Yeah, we've got a lot of just gaming groups kind of collectively hanging out in Forever Classic right now.
And yeah, that's really it right now. I haven't been tackling anything else right this second.
Yeah. Joe, I think there's one that me and you can talk about because both of us have played it. Because it's my understanding that you finished Ori and the Blind Forest.
I did, and then I jumped immediately into Will of the Wisps, like
Which
the
is what I'm
following
playing
day,
currently.
and it was interesting to program because they do feel very similar, particularly in the beginning. But I kept trying to do things you can't do yet because sequelitis or whatever things. You can't, you lose your powers.
You don't have the same powers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And the way the powers work is different too, because you're equipping abilities and moves, and some of the more permanent ones that you're familiar with from previous games are now remapped to different buttons.
Right. Or used in slightly different puzzle solving skills.
And so that's been interesting getting used to, but I'm enjoying it. I think the second one has a little bit more of like a mysterious kind of like lore feeling to it, whereas the first one was pretty straightforward, like just trying to like, go through the story. And this one is like, there's side quests and there's hints and rumors, and you're kind of like, oh, there's a library in the swamp. If you were to find it, I'm sure you would find some knowledge. The first one to me
feels like a very basic fairy tale, like a Disney or something. But then the sequel feels almost like the Dark Crystal, where it's that same general structure, just far more complex and deep.
Yeah, well, it in some ways it kind of reminded me of the change up from Jak and Daxter to the second one. Whereas the first one's a very straightforward 3D platformer, with almost
Jak,
with almost no story at all. You just go from from world to world or whatever, and then collect the things. And the second one is like all story. They added guns and like all these other things, and like the whole thing just like exploded into a much more complicated and robust system for the game. And it almost felt like that same kind of evolution. It took a bit of a darker turn. They added a lot more elements to the gameplay. But I'm really, really enjoying it. I've been talking to a friend who's been playing through it as well.
Now, where are you at in Will of the Wisps then? Because I just reached the ice section.
Oh, I'm only about like 2 hours in.
Yeah, I've only I think I've put 5 or 6 hours, maybe.
Okay,
maybe.
Yeah, so I'm far enough that I didn't know there was an ice world.
Okay, well, yeah. So that game, the only thing that I dislike about the Ori games in particular is they get real freaking precise and finicky with certain jumps and sections, to where you basically have to execute it perfectly to reach certain areas. And I hate that, because like, especially in the chase sections, which are these really long, elegant, action-packed sections with swelling music, and it's like the most impressive thing ever. But then you'll hit sections where like the visuals won't necessarily like signpost the player properly, and so you'd be like, what the hell do I do?
Where do I go? And then a lot
dying in that one spot.
Yeah, until you kind of figure it out, and you have seconds to figure it out.
Yeah,
I don't mind it so much for getting into I don't mind it so much for getting into the secret areas. Like if there's a secret, sure, make that a challenge. It's an extra thing that's not necessarily required. But if you nail that jump, you get a bonus for it. But for like the final chase scene in Blind Forest, it's just grueling.
Trial and error.
Yeah, and like there were times where I'd get the muscle memory down for a section, and then it would change. Like the rate at which the falling rocks would come would be different than the previous attempt, and then I would just die because I'm like, well, it wasn't how I had learned how to play the level. Yeah. So there's some like RNG in it too that really like requires it to be somewhat reactionary.
It sometimes feels like the game doesn't quite keep up with the player, especially in Will of the Wisps. I found out like there have been sections where I've been moving really fast and go in a way where the camera wasn't like steadily panning like the opposite direction, and I would just be off camera for several seconds. Just like waiting for the camera to show up, and I'm like, whoa, I did not mean to do that. Come on, game.
I'll have to pay attention to that because you're on the Switch, correct?
Yes, I am on the Switch.
So I'm wondering if maybe there's a performance difference.
Could be. It could be a hardware thing.
Switch versus $1,500 computer. Let's see if there's a performance difference.
Yeah. Now, the cool thing about the Switch version is even though the game is like visually, downscaled a lot. Like there's a lot of aliasing, there's a lot of just like rendering things going on. That game runs incredibly smooth. Like it is pretty much, from at least the way I feel, like a max frame rate thing. I think it might be 60, but it could be a 30, but I'm pretty certain it runs max the entire time, and I haven't had frame issues at all.
So they tried to really hard to make sure that it performed well on the hardware that it had. That's good.
And
but
speaking of frame rates, a game that I've been playing that definitely runs at 60, but feels like it might be taxing my battery a little bit, and I think we might have talked about this last week, is that Hot Shot Racing. It's a low poly style, retro style racing game, almost in the vein of like a pole position or an outrun or even like an old school Ridge Racer. And so you're like racing to get certain checkpoints at certain times. And while I usually hate those sort of racing games, I've been having a lot of fun with this one. It controls really well. It's super snappy. And it's just like, it's got such a distinct visual style, and all the maps look really good. The only thing is that, like, I don't like any of the characters. And I think this is kind of what they were going for, but they're all just like egotistical dicks. They're all mean to each other, and they're all mean all the time. And you only get like that flavor of their personality once you beat a pre or whatever, and you always get the same cutscene no matter which pre you finish. And so I don't know. It could have been so much cooler, but it seems like the devs have committed to making additional content for free, and I'm excited to see where that goes. At the end of the day, this is a fine retro arcade style racer. I'll have a review soon. It's done. I just need to put pictures on it. So I think I gave it like an 8 or a high 7. Like I was surprised by it. I thought it was really cool.
But aside from the Ori games, I have jumped back into Left 4 Dead 2, which randomly got this massive update that includes like unused like dialogue and like weapons from the orange box or whatever collection from Half-Life, like the Half-Life 2 guns, and they also included a whole new campaign and a bunch of new survival maps. But that's just like awesome. This like crazy random like massive update, and the last update was a fan-made campaign was made official in like 2012. And so 8 years later, we're suddenly getting this big, huge update, which makes me maybe speculate that they're trying to generate some hype for the series again, so that the audience is primed and ready for an announcement for a third title.
Now, it's my understanding that this Last Stand update was very community-driven. And the other thing that I want to toss out is in the interviews that Jeff Keighley put out about Half-Life Alyx, they talk about running through a lot of different IPs through the VR systems that they were developing, Left 4 Dead being one of them. And so there's definitely prototypes floating around at Valve, I'm certain, of a Left 4 Dead, say, like VR style game. And zombie games work really, really well in VR. They're just popular, as you know, it's just a no-brainer of something that would work. So if we're gonna get more Left 4 Dead content, and judging on how critically acclaimed Half-Life Alyx was, I would almost bet dollars to donuts that we'll see it in the VR platform rather than the hardcore PC platform that they traditionally were like supporting.
That might be enough for me to go VR. I really enjoy the Left 4 Dead franchise. I love the like cooperative shooter element to it. It was like my roommates in college and I would sit down and just play for hours. And you know, because that's when we, you know, started college in like 2008. That was like when the game came out, and so you know, for that 4-year period, that was the game that we liked to sit down and play. And I remember like getting into the mod scene during that time too. Like someone had recreated Helm's Deep from Lord of the Rings as a survival map, so you could like, you know, you're trying to defend Helm's Deep for as long as possible, and you know, stuff like that was always just super fun. But you know, playing through the new campaign, it was originally.
Did you guys get to play together? Because I know you were like coordinating something before.
We did play together last night, but just like one of the already established ones, just to run through it. The new one is a campaign version of a survival map, is my understanding. And so there is a survival map where you're just trying to survive while you are at like a lighthouse. And so the campaign is the journey of getting to the lighthouse. That's basically what it is. And now included in the campaign is you can escape. Whereas in survival mode, you don't escape. You just survive as long as possible. And unless you have a group of 4, survival is so difficult.
That's because the AI is so like blatantly...
Yeah, the ally AI is total garbage, and they're basically only useful to hold some extra health packs.
But Zach, do you have much of a history with Left 4 Dead? Because it's a game that I played very briefly. Like my best moments of this game was playing with my buddy Ben, and so that's when we first got back into PC gaming. And he's like, "We'll play Left 4 Dead with me," and we had a fucking blast. But other than that, I never play this game.
So I've never played it on PC till last night. I didn't own it on PC until the other day when it went on sale. But me and my little brother and like a couple various friends. Whoops.
This breaking news from about Left 4 Dead 2.
Yeah, I mean, you never know, I guess.
I don't know. Maybe I'll have another one of my players on my fantasy team, like out on a concussion. So in case you're wondering, I'm probably not winning fantasy football this week.
Oh.
But no, I played the shit out of it, all of it.
Yeah.
I've played 1 and 2. I've played them back and forward until I had them down to a science. But it's been like 10 plus years since I've played. So
were you on like the PlayStation or the Xbox back in the day?
Yeah, PlayStation.
Nice.
For sure it was PlayStation.
Because I think I owned it on the 360.
Yeah, it was definitely PlayStation, but we played a lot of it. Like, me and my brother could just, like, we could leave the AI to die and be fine.
Yeah.
That was after lots of practice.
Yeah, last night was kind of interesting because it was, like, I'm still pretty rusty, and my memory is foggy on some of the things, and we got to, like, the finale of one of the chapters, and we just could not figure out how to get to where we needed to go. And we survived for a really long time, and you just eventually run out of health items, basically. And we ended up losing because we just couldn't remember how to get up there. So we did eventually figure it out, but it was too late. So we gave it another run and did it. But Zach also had a really interesting thing happen when he tried to play with his controller.
Oh my god, yeah. I plugged in the controller for the PS4 because I have it set up to use through Steam. I was like, yeah, this is great. Only problem is it doesn't want to like let you turn with the joysticks and stuff. It just kind of like forces me to move around because it uses the 6-axis immediately.
Oh, that's weird.
So it uses the motion controls.
So...
That's kind of awesome. I see a lot of people like taking the 6-axis on the DualShock 4 and also taking the gyro controls built into the Steam controller and using that for various PC shooters. So it's interesting that it defaulted to that.
I could see combining it. I could see combining it like with the Wii U, where you could like in the Zelda games and shooter games where you could slightly adjust your aim. To get those micro adjustments with the gyro controls. But yeah, all of his camera control was through the motion, so he's like
oh man. I'm not a big fan of gyro. Like, that's one of the reasons I think that Splatoon never stuck with me, and it never was a game that I specifically wanted to play and purchase. Because, like, I don't know, something about it is just finicky enough that I find it hard to deal with.
Yeah,
it's cool.
I thought it felt... my experience was I thought it felt great, but I'm just not a huge fan of competitive shooters. But... So those were basically the two things I've been playing this week. It's been a lot of fun to jump back into Left 4 Dead 2, especially since I did get to play it with one of my old roommates that I used to play it with all the time.
That's cool.
So just kind of like reliving those memories. Like I'm like, I was always the person that would get targeted by all the special infected, and
Yeah.
that hasn't changed a bit. I'll be getting attacked by a hunter, and then someone will save me, and then I'll stand up and immediately get hit by a charger, and then a spitter will spit on both me and the charger, and I'm just like laying in a pool of acid, just like, well, I guess I'm just here.
Re-roll that one.
But yeah,
the last game that I've been playing is Persona 5 Royal. This is the game that causes me so much stress because it's always in the back of my mind. Like, hey, you got to finish this. Hey, you should do something with this.
That was what, March that you started that?
Yeah, when Royal came out, I've been playing it ever since. So I got to the point where when I first played Persona 5, I got to a specific point. I got past that in Royal, and then now I'm getting to a point where like I'm finally catching up to the whole story is based in a frame narrative. So you like start the game and you're being interrogated by a police officer or whatever. And so throughout the game it alludes to that conversation, and you steadily like build up the frame narrative, so to speak. And so I'm to the point now where the timelines are starting to come together, where I'm like in the present rather than playing in the past.
Okay.
And that's interesting, but God, Persona is just like, it's such a time-consuming game. And the best way that I've found to play this game is remote streaming it to my phone and playing with a little bracket thing on my PlayStation controller, so I can play it as a portable as God intended. This game is too fucking long to be sitting around at a desk playing.
You know what's going to happen the moment you finish that game, right? Switch port.
I'm going to want to play it again or something.
Well, no, you're going to finish the game after spending all that time fighting with it and playing it, streaming remote play on your phone, and then it's going to get a Switch port.
Yep. And it definitely deserves to be on Switch. I mean, we've already seen Atlas like openly commit to not only PC ports, but they're doing Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne on the Switch here in the next year or so. And so that's a big deal because that game was, one of the first Persona-related things to make it to the West back on the PS2, and it's been, a cult phenomenon ever since. So, I mean, it's a good RPG. It's just a very long-winded RPG, and there's so many, like, moving parts to it, but it all is a linear progression that I really find that it's difficult to, like, stay focused on it, so to speak. So I spent all day yesterday just playing Persona, and it was fine. I feel like there's so many things I could be doing to make the combat better or have stronger characters, but like I downloaded a couple DLC characters that basically are really overpowered Persona, and they're usually characters from the previous games, so it's a bit of fan service on top of everything. And so with those characters, I've been able to kind of mitigate my just like skill of just playing the game, but like going through combat, getting the right things down to where you've basically won the game in a single turn, that's super satisfying. I just wish you could skip the all-out attack where like everybody attacks and then there's like a frame animation. It's really cool the first couple times you see it, but after seeing that animation like thousands of times, I want to skip it. And I really wish that was included. So there's just little things that like keep Persona going longer than I would have liked. And I think this is a game that definitely could have had a lot of fat trimmed out of it. But overall, it's an enjoyable JRPG experience, and it's one of the best. So I recommend it if you specifically want to play like one thing for the next 3 months. Definitely worth your time, and you can get a lot of hours out of it. So I don't know. I'll beat it eventually.
But the big thing this week is Tokyo Game Show, which is usually a big event every year, especially for like the Japanese studios. But it's always up in the air this year, particularly if things are going to happen, and it's moved forward this year in at least some capacity. And we're not seeing a lot of like brand new news, like announcements and stuff, but we are seeing a lot more content from the stuff we already know about.
Yeah, so if it was a game that was briefly announced at a recent showing or like at maybe the last TGS, we got a lot more supplemental details in this TGS, whether it be gameplay footage or just like updates from the developers. It was very developer centric. Like there was a lot of people passionate about what they're doing, showing what they're doing to their audiences live on, Twitch and whatever. And so far the things that I've watched have been really cool, but it doesn't carry the same energy, at least for me, that it used to back in the day, because I used to watch the G4 coverage, and I used to like watch all the IGN stuff that would go on, and it seems like a lot of that was missed out on this year. Whether getting journalists to that location is hard or what have you, but like it just doesn't feel as exciting this year. And maybe it's because that lack of major announcements, because all the cool Japanese dev stuff that we got was from like the PS5 event, the Switch events.
Yeah.
So they're pretty much everybody's like shown what they're doing anyways.
Yeah.
But the supplemental information is really cool.
I think one of the things that we're most excited about and we're seeing a lot of is the new Monster Hunter, Monster Hunter Rise for the Switch coming out this coming spring. And
March.
They've, a ton of new gameplay footage is coming out, like whole hunts and how you interact with the new Palamutes, and
the wire bugs as well is a big part of this next game.
And showing off what like the visuals are going to look like, which is definitely more classic Monster Hunter vibes, which I'm pretty excited about, because while I love the more grounded, realistic approach of World, there are times where I miss the kind of like crazy, like saturated color palette and wacky weapons that came with the classic Monster Hunter games, particularly the 3DS titles.
So I think this is probably best described as a mix of, it's like, what if Generations had a sequel, but the devs were very aware of why World worked. And so there's a lot of elements being put into Monster Hunter Rise that are like a sandwich between those two styles. It's very Japanese, because the new area is like super based on feudal Japan. And even one of the new monsters they were showing off in these gameplay footage is like a giant platypus kappa that does sumo moves, the Tetranodon. And so there's clearly like a big cultural influence that they're jamming into this game. And like we're getting the zones. There's no loading in these zones, just like there wasn't in World, which is super cool. We've already noticed that the insect glaive, so certain moves that keep the player in the air, are also featured in Monster Hunter Rise in a very similar fashion. So it definitely doesn't feel like, oh, these devs were doing their own thing while the World devs were doing one thing. This feels like both of the classical Monster Hunter style merging with the quality of life and the gameplay improvements of Monster Hunter World. And to me, that's very exciting. The only thing that I think is disappointing is visually the graphics obviously have taken a huge hit because it's a Switch title, and I don't know if they'll even attempt to port that to other consoles. And to me, that's a bummer. But at the end of the day, we're going to get another major multi-platform Monster Hunter game, because this Monster Hunter World was the most profitable and most selling thing Capcom has ever put out. Ever. And it's so crazy popular now. And like, I think that gives Capcom a lot to play with. And whatever we get after Rise and after Stories 2, that's going to be the World sequel that we're kind of hoping for. So in my mind, in at least probably by 2022, 2023, we should be getting a sequel, so to speak, to Monster Hunter World. And that'll be on, PS5, all the Xboxes, Stadia probably. So I'm really, really excited. Zach, have you seen this footage?
What, for Rise?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I've been, so I opened up the IGN article written by Adam Bankhurst and was going down through the trailers on it, and they're awesome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Specifically, like in the show, I'm just excited to see Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Not necessarily from this show, I'm just excited for that game.
Yeah, in general. But Rise, have you got to see any of the actual hunt footage that went out?
Yeah. I've been, before we started, while you were munching down before the show, I just watched the whole thing.
That's
and
so
it
cool.
looks super fun. And the thing that really catches me is you can go like everywhere. You can climb everything.
Yeah, it's really vertical, and because
it's speaking
the wire
to my
bug,
like getting into places I'm not supposed to get into.
Oh, you're going to. You're gonna find the barriers and how to break into things. I know you. But it's so cool that And I mean that's one of the things that I think really brought Monster Hunter into the West popularity was that verticality. Because if you think about Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, that was a very vertical game. That's the game that introduced climbing. And so they're basically taking that like verticality and taking it way further.
Yeah, no, it's pretty sweet.
And it's gonna be on Switch. We could have Monster Hunter get-togethers really easy again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm stoked for that because I have Generations, but nobody plays it.
nah, I skipped Generations.
It's
Yeah,
cool.
so did I.
It's just hard to go back to after playing World. And so I'm excited for this one because, like Joe was saying, the visual design elements are going to be more playful than they were in World, and definitely there's going to be a lot more like options in general because Monster Hunter traditionally has been crammed full of assets, and we didn't get that necessarily in World, and so I'm wanting that mentality again.
Yeah.
I'm
They
ready.
really, yeah. No, I want all the goodies of World, but I want like so many more monsters, or like world size. Like you had to go to a zone to go to this part of the world to this part B, part C, part D, all open. Like you just traveled between the points to do whatever you needed to do, and just
Yeah.
from a click, not having to like travel.
Mm-hmm.
I want that, but I want so many more monsters. Like I don't want it to be like this is a timed thing. Like I want
Yeah.
just like progression through there, like you're progressing through all of the ecosystems.
Yeah, I want things like electric guitar hunting horns and
Yeah.
just
The
like,
swordfish greatsword.
yeah, just nonsense. I love
Which I
that
think
stuff.
is immoral. But we got a lot of footage of the longsword and the dual blades and Tetranodon and I think the big crested bird that they were showing off. And so there's a lot of footage out there. There's probably like
Oh, what
an
is it?
hour's worth of just straight gameplay. And
Hmm.
it's really fun to see people like break that down. I think RX Gaming is still one of the best Monster Hunter coverage channels on the internet. And the other person that I want to throw out is Gaijin Goomba put out a very cool cultural piece that breaks down the design elements, the Japaneseness of Monster Hunter Rise in the trailers. And that's where I actually like recognized the sumo thing was because he was talking about Tetranodon, the kappa elements, the fact that it used sumo moves. Like that's all just baked into the designs from a culture perspective, and I find that really interesting. So I would definitely check out those two channels: Gaijin Goomba, who's just great at cultural analysis, anyways, and RX Gaming, who is very good at games that are endless, so to speak. So he covers a lot of Monster Hunter, a lot of Destiny. Both
Yeah.
great channels to like figure out some stuff.
So another thing that we saw more of that you're probably more excited about than maybe me is Resident Evil Village.
Yes. So I am definitely one of the people that was very hesitant on Resident Evil 7 because I really liked what, Resident Evil 1 set up. I loved what Resident Evil 4 was wholeheartedly, and I even thought Resident Evil 5 and 6 were fine. But Resident Evil 7 was probably one of my favorite games of the generation because of what it sets up. And what they're doing in Village is taking what worked in 7 and expanding it so much farther. Like they really talked about in the interviews and stuff that they want to focus on exploration and larger environments. And to me, that's the one thing I've wanted in Resident Evil for a long time. So we basically have a whole village with like a castle and werewolves and shit, and it's like it's all going to be explorable kind of at the player's pace. And I don't know if that's gonna like open up different things that you can do at your own pace, or you can kind of like Breath of the Wild, how you basically do what you want, but there's all these like main goals that eventually lead to like a singular goal. I hope so because I love that puzzle box style of design. But everything I've seen about Resident Evil Village is just super super exciting, and they're talking like they might end up doing ports to PS4 and Xbox One. But judging on the graphical fidelity and just the scope they're going for, I don't know if that's going to be possible, at least in a way that makes sense for them. But Resident
That
Evil Village looks incredible, and I really hope they do a PSVR version.
I really want to see more of it. It's really giving me Silent Hill feeling.
Yeah, so this one, especially the way like characters move and how they look, and how it actually reminds me more of Bloodborne than anything because it's that like old Gothic medieval kind of structures and architecture, and like the
Hmm.
weird misty hamlets and that type of thing. But yeah, I mean, Silent Hill is definitely a game that its influences go far beyond what it was at the time. And
Yeah.
since like I'm the big Resident Evil guy, of course I'm the one that's going to be playing it hopefully on day one. But there's actually a game that's very related to Silent Hill that I want to bring up. That because I've seen gameplay footage, I don't know if I want to play it anymore. So the medium is very much influenced by Silent Hill 2. It's clear. They've talked about it. They got one of the composers of the original projects to work with them to make, music and stuff. They got Troy Baker to do the monster at one point, which is interesting. I saw an interview with him on IGN. But the medium, the more I look at it as a game, and Bloober Team is one of those teams that I always think like just missed the mark in making something truly amazing in horror. And so I was really hoping that this might be it, but it seems like it's more of a point and click adventure where you basically play two worlds at the same time, and sometimes you like predominantly play one world over the other. And because it's more of a point and click adventure where you're like, clicking on certain things in the environment, looking at things closer and being like, oh, this person's name's here. Who's that person? And then doing those weird puzzles, like it actually looks so slow to me that I don't know if I'm going to want to play it. I was hoping for more of like an Evil Within or a Silent Hill, like running around an environment, exploring these spaces, having very minor combat elements. Like that's what I want out of a horror game. But the medium, it's got so much good going for it, but I don't know about that gameplay so far. We'll see. But it's the one game that I've seen TGS gameplay footage for where I'm like, wow, wish I didn't see that.
It still looks creepy. So it's something that I want to play. I don't know if I'm going to go out of my way to get it to play.
Yeah, I mean, if we got a review code, I'd play it, obviously. But, like, I don't think it's one that I wanted to because in my mind, that game is actually one of the higher on my list on the Xbox One. If I end up with an Xbox One or Xbox S,
yeah, it's already started.
Yeah, it's already begun. The Xbox, but so that was like top of mind for me of what I could get close to launch. But now after seeing it, I'm like, I don't know about that. I think I'll get something else.
One of the other bigger things that we got to see more of is Hyrule Warriors.
Yes. Zach mentioned that briefly a second ago, but we are getting a canonical prequel to Breath of the Wild in a Musou game?
Yeah.
And I'm kind of okay with that.
I mean, it would be really appropriate if it's just still going to be really focused on the fall of Hyrule. I mean, it's going to be a battle, and that's going to be a battle game. So
yeah,
it makes sense to do it as Musou.
Yeah, because it's the lead up to the events of Breath of the Wild. It's how it all fell, and it's these massive battles. It's interesting though It'll be interesting playing through a game in this style where you're smashing 100 guys in about 30 seconds, and going through all these battles, but you lose. The ending of this game is not supposed to be good. And so I'll be curious to see how they handle that, because we know it's a losing battle. We know that it ends with Link going to sleep for 100 years or whatever. And
you know all those characters you grew to love as flashbacks? Do you want to see them die in your arms?
Yeah.
Which sucks, because I love Urbosa. I love the champions. They're all wonderful characters in the Zelda universe.
I think they've done a fantastic job in preserving the art style.
Well, they worked far closer with the Zelda team than they did with the prior game.
Yeah.
Which I think was a very good call.
Well, and I think it's easier to do in this one because this one is a Breath of the Wild, specific Hyrule Warriors game, whereas the previous one was they had to find out how to make all the different, Zelda games mix in a way that made sense. How do we bring in young Link in the same time as another Link or another character and bring them together in a way that makes them make sense? Characters from different properties with very distinct art styles. How do we bring them in alongside another game with a totally different art style? And so the
visual cohesiveness, I imagine, was a big part of making Hyrule Warriors work, and it did for the most part.
Yeah, I had a ton of fun with that with the original.
I have it on Switch,
on Wii U, and it's a good time.
I like Muso games more than I thought I would. Like I played Dynasty Warriors or no, Warriors Orochi 4 and I might be getting that wrong. It was a recent just straight up like it's basically the Smash Brothers of Dynasty Warriors games where they basically take all their franchises characters and smash them into one game. And they've been doing that for years. But it came to the Switch and I had so much fun just like going through missions, unlocking characters while listening to a podcast. I thought that was like one of the best ways to digest that game. And I really liked the Dragon Quest spin-offs that they did. So the Dragon Quest Warriors 1 and 2 I thought were excellent games, especially the second one.
Yeah, I have one that is what is it?
Oh god, if they ported the Gundam ones, I'd be all over
It's something
it.
it's like something All Stars, but it's like brings in Ninja Gaiden along with like Persona, I think.
Yeah.
And so I had that one, and that one's that one's kind of fun, but I'm not familiar with like any of these characters, so my connection to it was kind of lost. Like I didn't have
Warriors All Stars, so it was a lot of like Koei Tecmo characters.
Yeah,
there's
that's
a
what it was.
Tokiden character in there. That Japanese style Monster Hunter game we've played in the past, and it seems like Tokiden might have influenced Monster Hunter Rise. Everything's circular.
But yeah, so it's cool to see that Nintendo is working with some of these other properties and other companies to expand the lore of Legend of Zelda, trusting other companies with tackling like basically this company is working with Nintendo to write the story of that war. And I think that's pretty cool. And that allows Nintendo to spend more time making the proper sequel. And so, you know, we kind of get this in-between game that kind of fills in that gap and will fill us in all the way up to everything, all the events leading up to the second one. And I wonder if there's going to be some clues or hints or like things placed that maybe we won't notice or realize until the second one comes out. Like, you know, all we've gotten so far is a teaser of Link and Zelda walking down and finding this like Ganon being like held in like stasis or whatever.
Or something
yeah, it's like super weird. And I wonder if we're gonna get like some like clues as to like what that's about, or like.
I still desperately hope that the Breath of the Wild sequel focuses on Zelda. Like I would really appreciate them starting the game, you playing Link, them killing Link, and then you playing the rest of the game.
Oh, you're looking to, you want them to make something that makes a lot of people mad.
Yes.
Sort of like the Last of Us. You want them to pull a Last of Us Part 2 is what you're saying.
Yes. Yep. That's precisely what I want. I expect a check by Monday. But Hyrule Warriors looks super, super cool, and this is definitely one that, depending on what releases around it and where I like stand on the whole PS5 Xbox situation, this is definitely one that I want to get.
Yeah. And
it comes out in November.
In that same vein, one of the new things we did see was a Dynasty Warriors 9 Empires reveal.
Yeah, so this is interesting because Dynasty Warriors 9 is like probably one of the worst things that company has put out in a very long time.
Okay.
And I didn't play it, but I saw the outcry of fans because I subscribe to those forums. I listen to Jim Sterling, and so the fan base seemed overly pissed off about Dynasty Warriors 9. So the fact that they're doing an Empires version is really surprising. And it might just take the general systems and assets of 9 and make a more traditional Dynasty Warriors game. And maybe that would be appealing. But the Empire series is more strategic focused. And I don't know if I've actually like interacted with any of them like directly. But it seems like a weird choice. I think more interesting out of Koei Tecmo's news library specifically is the fact that they are doing a traditional Dynasty Warriors on mobile. And you look at the footage and it looks like a fucking Dynasty Warriors game. And that's kind of surprising because most mobile titles are based off certain franchises normally look like an amalgamation of something else. And so maybe the Dynasty Warriors mobile is a cool thing.
It could be. I'll pull it up here in just a second.
But again, I think that the Warriors formula is so like appealing.
There's a satisfaction to it.
The only thing that would bring you to it is the fact that, do you want to play a Musou game with the Berserk characters, which I don't recommend that one, or the Gundam characters, or, the One Piece characters, whatever. But I think that the Musou mechanic set and the framework is really appealing to like most people. They just don't realize it.
Well, it's almost the opposite of, say, a Souls game, where that is like, every single, even minor enemy you have to sort of pay attention to, particularly when you're first starting out, in order to get progress. And then there's this, where one swing of your sword and 12 guys go flying through the air.
It's mostly mindless. Like, even on the hard, I used to play that same Switch game on the absolute hardest difficulty I could find, and even that was just like very turn off your brain, do something else while you're playing this sort of thing.
The other thing,
I've never owned one, but they look fun to play, and I like watching like hack and slash stuff sometimes.
I really recommend that Dragon Quest one. That's probably the best one I've played.
The other mobile game that was announced that is interesting is there's a Ni no Kuni MMORPG coming to mobile devices.
And they haven't announced if it's going to be localized, is the way I understand it.
Oh, okay. I just saw it
so,
pop up.
Like, specific and weird.
Yeah, it's a kind of a fun world that they've established in terms of visual design and even just like lore wise through playing through the games myself, that it's built to be inhabited by lots of players. And I think that's really cool. The fact that it is mobile centric is an interesting choice to me.
Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, MMOs traditionally are PC based because there's that much more taxing on the hardware because of the amount of players you have in it.
Yeah,
but
and
Joe, if this gets localized, is it something that you would play? Because I know you're the one who's most versed in this franchise.
I would give it a shot for sure. And looking at this, it looks pretty good for a mobile device. Like, it doesn't look like they made too many compromises, but at the same time, it is a game that they were able to get looking as good as it did because of the style choices they made. It's some of the best cell shading I've ever seen. In terms of, both Wrath of the White Witch and Revenant Kingdom, they both look phenomenal. They took this approach. I think originally working with Studio Ghibli on the design sense was a great idea because they really do really pull a lot of beauty out with these cell shaded characters on top of like watercolored background textures. Is just such a great choice stylistically, and it really does pull you in and make it feel like you're playing a Studio Ghibli movie. That's what it is.
No doubt.
And playing an MMO in that space, like, for me, it would come down to if the gameplay is fun, first of all, but also if I can find anyone else to play with, because that's like the whole point, right? Yeah. Is to engage in a world with people. And as someone who doesn't play a ton of things online with strangers, we'll have to see if it has staying power for me. The only MMO that I've ever really spent a decent amount of time in is Star Wars, and that's just because it has a strong solo player component. And I love
Star Wars.
I love Star Wars. If you couldn't tell by my hat right now. But I just thought it was interesting that it was a mobile centric and that it seemingly looks really good. They didn't have to make too many compromises for the visual style in order to make it look like, one look at this, even if I didn't know it was a mobile, I would be able to tell that it was Ni no Kuni related. Yeah. Which is not always true when a franchise makes its way to mobile in this way.
Now, before we get into the big one, I do want to bring up a game by Namco Bandai, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's this anime-style game that looks kind of similar to, what's that Platinum game that came out on Switch recently? It was like Astral something or other.
Astral
Chain?
What
I'm talking about. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Astral Chain, but it's like got its own thing. It's called Scarlet Nexus, and this seems like
it looks really, really, really like Astral
Chain.
I've
already got that one pulled up here. So
yeah, so not Astral Chain. Scarlet Nexus, I think looks interesting, but it's gonna all kind of boil down to how cool is that combat. And it's one of those things that it just feels like there's not much unique about it, and that's the one thing that pulls me away from it. But it's probably the biggest thing that Namco brought to TGS. They talked a little bit about some Gundam stuff. They talked about some DLC for Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, that sort of thing. But this definitely seems like something that they're trying to market quite a bit. And so with the success, I guess critical success of Code Vein, maybe that's kind of the same audience they're shooting for. But it definitely feels closer to like an Astral Chain, at least visually.
Yeah, this looks very like industrial sci-fi, whereas Code Vein was dark fantasy.
It reminds me of, did you ever play an RPG called Ray Gigant? And it's such an obscure title that I doubt either of you even know what that is.
Not a
But it was
clue.
like this super striking dungeon crawler on the Vita that I actually really liked, that I would love to go back and finish one of these days. I think it has a really cool style. But it kind of reminds me of that. Like the PS Vita era of JRPGs is what this seems to encapsulate, because it also has flavors of Freedom Wars, which is another like character action RPG that kind of had some Monster Hunter elements to it, but was ultimately like, Tokyo's destroyed, monsters are here, and we gotta go kill them. So
Yeah.
I don't know, it doesn't quite capture me, but like,
It's
if
also
that
got
combat's cool, could be cool.
Yeah, and they said it's going to have RPG elements into it instead of just be like combat weapon focused.
Oh yeah, it'll have the like weapon progressions and get your gear and that sort of thing, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
It might even be similar developer groups as Code Vein. I think right now Namco Bandai's most interesting like game to me is Little Nightmares 2, and I think they showed that off a little bit at TGS, but we got a trailer I think at Gamescom that was really, really cool. But I think Little Nightmares is like such a creepy, just like unnerving visual style, and I'm really looking forward to one actually owning up and playing the first game, because I think it's actually terrifying. But I really want to play the second one, I think, fresh without knowing anything about it.
Do we have a release window for Scarlet Nexus?
Oh, did we get a release window? I swear they were targeting early next year. Because it's coming to all platforms. Yeah, they don't have they just said 2021.
Okay.
As far as I can tell. Yeah, apparently, according to IGN, as of recently, they did say that there's a second protagonist that you can play as, and she comes along with a different campaign. So at the very least, there is some replay value here.
That's pretty cool. I didn't realize that there were going to be two separate campaigns. I missed that.
It must have been something recent, because this is a today article. But I think, when it comes to Japanese developers, obviously Capcom is the like big one that I've really been attached to here recently, but the one that has permeated my entire existence is Square Enix. And I was really looking forward to see what Square Enix specifically brought to the table for TGS, and I believe we may have got some interviews about Final Fantasy 16, but the major thing that I saw from their offerings was Nier. And so we are getting a remake, a modern version of Nier Replicant, which is a prequel, I believe, to Automata. And so this is Nier Replicant version 1.22474487139.
Oh, that's the official name.
Replicant. That's the official title. And so this is coming out in April, so April 23rd of next year. And it looks awesome.
That title is so pretentious that it almost goes into satire of itself.
It's so aware of what it is, and the Nier property is actually super big to Square Enix, probably far bigger than any of us can imagine, because in the press release for Replicant, they also cited that Nier Automata has sold 4.5 million copies. Dude, Nier as a property was very much a niche thing, because it comes from Drakengard, and Drakengard wasn't super popular. And so it's so interesting to me that because of Nier Automata, and I think that this has a lot to do with the main character's design, because she showed up a lot in fan art, she was cosplayed a lot, she shows up
Yeah.
in porn, and
Yeah.
has for ever since that character was revealed. And I
Yeah.
think that generally just keeps the character like in the top of people's mind. And
Well,
so
I also think the ending of that game.
Square.
Yeah, I also think the ending of that game really pushed its popularity too, because it really broke some ground in capturing some various like community mindedness of gaming in a similar way that Undertale kind of broke the narrative of beating up monsters in RPGs.
Nier Automata was probably one of the most recommended by critics game that I remember of that year, and maybe even the next couple years.
Yeah.
And I only got to like ending 3 or 4, I think. I just got to one of the not the 9S character, but the other lady character is where I got.
I've seen a number of people get through the various endings and it just like hits them. There's an emotional impact to that ending, and I'm not going to spoil anything. That I think that when you finish it, if you find out someone else hasn't played it, you want them to play it and get that ending so that you can see their response. Because it is a distinctly unique and very self-aware ending.
So that really, visually and mechanic based, it seems like Nier Replicant is going to be similar to Automata, kind of building on what made Automata work. And I'm excited to see where it goes, like story-wise, because like you're saying, it's not just, the plot. It's definitely a more symbolic story. It's more representative of some other things going on.
Right.
And so not only are we getting that, but we're also getting a Nier mobile title that will be translated into like global audiences. So we're getting a game called Nier Reincarnation. And I don't know if there's gameplay floating around of this. I was so attached to Replicant gameplay because it just looks like more cool Nier shit. But I don't know. The Nier as a brand is like, it's building, and I think it means more to Square Enix than we initially thought, and that's exciting to me because I like Nier, even though I haven't opened the one original copy that I have sitting here, and I've only like played the basics of Automata. But that franchise and that like desire to do something more with a video game is evident in those games.
Yeah,
and I can't wait to see where it goes.
It's definitely I've heard it being described as similar to how Inception is a movie about making movies.
Yeah.
Okay. Nier Automata is a game about making games.
I need to sit down and finish it for sure. All right, so that pretty well covers the major. I mean, there was a new Tekken Character 7 character announced. Kunimitsu is coming back, so she's a related to Yoshimitsu, cool ninja chick. So we haven't seen her in a while. But other than that, I think that about covers it for TGS.
Yeah. There was one smaller thing, though, that caught my attention, and that was the Saga Final Fantasy Legend Collection, 30th Anniversary Collection.
Oh, yeah, we've known about that for a while now, but that still seems like just a really cool thing to put out.
Yeah, so
and
basically...
the Saga games, like, I haven't touched, but there's remakes on, like, modern consoles, and they look like great RPGs.
Yeah, so it's just kind of fun to get these collections that, for to be able to replay games... reliably in a new or like on a new platform, and just kind of like particularly for that like fan base and that nostalgia, being able to play those Final Fantasy Legend games. Back in the day, Final Fantasy on the go would have been such an exciting concept.
True. Yeah. I remember those days.
So you can pop a Final Fantasy, a whole adventure into your Game Boy and take it with you. And it's kind of just in recognition of that. And now you can take multiple of them with you on the go and slap them on their Switch. And if it's anything with how well the Mana collection was on Switch, I think it'll be worth at least taking a look at if this sort of retro appreciation,
which I'm always a fan of. Y'all know that.
Yeah. So if that sort of thing appeals to you, this could be a fantastic way to experience these games either again or for the first times.
Yeah. So before we wrap up for the night, what is the most exciting piece out of TGS for each of you? And Zach, we'll start with you. So for everything we've seen for TGS, or at least in gaming news, it doesn't have to be TGS, I guess, but like, what is like one thing that you're super pumped about?
I would have to say I'm actually probably out of that between Monster Hunter. Of course, we always have high hypes for Monster Hunter. I'm really hyped for
Yeah.
Hyrule Warrior or the new Hyrule Warrior stuff.
Right on. And is it because you just want to see more of the Breath of the Wild universe?
Yeah, I mean, I still haven't played all the way through Breath of the Wild yet either. So
You should stream that. That would be really fun, I think. Because I played it like all the way through. I never messed with the DLC, but I think that make for a fun stream. Is like
yeah, I
any of
think
us who either haven't finished it or want to go back to it. That'd make for a good one.
yeah, I think that's the plan. Actually, me and Lauren were talking about it a little bit.
Or if you haven't finished Hyrule Warriors, which is me, that would also make a fun stream in the lead up to. Yeah. So Joe, what for you? What is like the big ticket item?
I mean, the two smaller things that, like, despite them being small, caught my attention would be the Ni no Kuni MMO and the collection of Saga Final Fantasy Legend thing. Both appeal to me, but this is like kind of out of my regular thing. But Resident Evil Village actually has some appeal for me. I enjoyed 7 quite a bit. It was a great game to like get. We got a group of friends together, and we would just pass the controller upon death, basically.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm finding that for me, horror games are a really great way to like get a group of people together and experience something and create like kind of a memory out of experiencing for the first time. Playing by myself, I just kind of like. It's way less enjoyable.
Big old scaredy cat, Mr. Alex.
Like the big thing for me last year was playing Dead Space for the first time, and
Ooh,
it did result in one of the greatest clips from my channel of all time of my daughter just coming out of the darkness and appearing in front of me and scaring just the total crap out of me. But that game was so anxiety inducing, and I will likely play the sequel this year on stream to keep that tradition going. But I think that this Resident Evil Village is almost the perfect thing to like really see where the series is going graphically and story wise. I like that it has kind of a more. It's kind of moving away from the whole zombie thing a little bit. Like I liked that 7 was centered around like this kind of like swamp, like hillbilly family.
And I mean, ultimately, it became like an Umbrella experiment gone wrong, but it was more in the like supernatural sense than in the like biological sense.
Yeah, they kind of changed it. Yeah, they kind of changed it up a little bit, and I liked that they were experimenting with the storytelling method of the Umbrella's still involved, and this is like one of their like experiments gone wrong that they just kind of abandoned, and it's in the middle of the swamp, so who cares? And someone stumbled upon it. But it's definitely centered around this, like, this family is legitimately crazy, regardless of Umbrella's involvement. And
dude, my favorite thing about Resident Evil 7 is the fact that, the was it the Bakers? I think it was the Bakers. So the family were such characters.
Yeah.
And that's something that, like, Resident Evil has always been focused on, but never really explored to the extent that happened in 7. Like, we got to see, Jack Baker when he was, like, normal and, like, pleading with the character, like, look, dude, we didn't mean for any of this to happen. We're good people. I promise you, we're just a family. And so all of the ways that they characterized that family in particular, I thought was really, really cool. And so I hope that carries into Resident Evil 8. I mean, we already know that they took the idea of Ethan Winters, the main character, and are like the first game he was very much an insert yourself protagonist, but now we want to give him his own story. And so that is what this is, Resident Evil Village. It is the story of Ethan Winters. And so to me, that's exciting. Like the idea of it being a more exploration based, larger environment game, that's what gets me excited as a Resident Evil player, because that's my favorite part. Being in the mansion, slowly finding all the pieces to make your way to different areas, like that's what makes that game so cool to me.
Yeah, and so one of the other things that it kind of reminds me, if you took the movie Hot Fuzz and took out the comedy.
Okay, yeah.
So you're just kind of like in this village, and there's all these like characters, Mm-hmm. But there's this like dark secret that this location has, and you're gonna uncover that secret as you go along. So there's clearly some sort of like threat, but how is it connected to these characters? Are they involved or not? And so there's like a mystery to uncover, and you're gonna like, depending on the direction you take in your gameplay, you might uncover the mystery in a different way than another player, depending on how open the exploration is.
And I hope it's really open, but we'll see.
But it might be like you can't go here until you have the blue pass, kind of open.
And we may even get Resident Evil Village as early as February, because it seems like a lot of the things happening at Capcom are going to be like, at launch, I think we're getting Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition. And then in March, we're getting Monster Hunter Rise. In the summer, we're getting Monster Hunter Stories 2. So I'm thinking maybe January, February is when we'll hope to see Resident Evil Village. And traditionally, Capcom does better with releasing Resident Evil titles early in the year, because that's what we saw with Resident Evil 2. Most of their games have released recently in the front section of the year. And they just kind of like have staying power throughout. And so, I don't know, man. Like, Resident Evil Village is definitely in my list of, like, I'm super, super excited for it. But I think I'm just ready to see what lies ahead for Monster Hunter. As a franchise. Not just, Monster Hunter Rise specifically. I think that Stories 2 is also really cool. And I want to see more and more done with Monster Hunter. I think that this year is going to be the year of Monster Hunter, because we're also getting that feature film at some point.
Oh, that's right.
And so I think that popularity-wise, we're going to see a lot of Monster Hunter in general. And I just love that people are coming to this franchise, because I've loved it for so long. And that, to me, is what's most exciting.
Yeah, the other thing we got this week, I don't know if this was TGS or if it was just an announcement, but the Yakuza series is getting a film adaptation.
Yep.
Which is fascinating to me, because one of my like big call-outs in that series is it's some of the best cinematography in video games I've ever seen. Like
excellent camera work.
They treat, particularly like in cutscenes, but even outside of cutscenes, they take composition and camera work in terms of telling their story very seriously, and you can tell, even in the cases where it's just a totally ridiculous, over the top, like ruckus of a scene where it's clearly like some crazy joke, the camera work is still really good. Mm-hmm. And they're like, what angle or how would the camera position itself in order to sell this moment to its best? And whoever they've got doing that is going to be really good, which means that my standards for the cinematography in a video game or in a movie adaptation of this game is going to be high.
The only criticism I've seen of this is, I think it might have been Imran Khan on Twitter, was like, I can't wait to see what white person they cast as the main character. And I'm like, that seems like something that would happen, and I hope it doesn't.
But, I
don't know. I want an all-Japanese cast.
I agree. I think that would make more sense. But at the same time, the Japanese don't seem to be as upset about that sort of thing as Americans. And it's interesting. Because I remember when Ghost in the Shell came out, Americans were mad. Mm-hmm. And the Japanese were like, we're super excited that Scarlett Johansson is heading the Ghost in the Shell movie, because she's a super big name Hollywood actress. And that's awesome that the series has attracted an actress of that caliber and will expose people to Ghost in the Shell. And they're like, she looks like the character, so we're cool with it. And like,
it's definitely like a cultural thing.
Yeah.
On how things are perceived outside or inside of a of a area, right?
But to sell to me they would really have to establish why a white person is in
Yeah.
the Yakuza.
To me, the perfect Yakuza film is one like you're talking about that really takes that cinematography angle and runs with it, and then
Yeah.
has an all Japanese cast, films it in Japanese. Like that's the sort of thing that I want to see out of Yakuza.
Yeah, it'd also be interesting to like see how they capture, because not only do they have to tell a narrative that feels like Yakuza, like there's a lot of parts of Yakuza that are just like going to the arcade or going to the batting cages or eating
How will
food.
they capture that mundane?
Yeah, and so I'm a
part of
bit
it?
curious to see if they implement that as well, because they only have estimated 2 hours to do this. And
Unless it's a series or something.
I'm also curious to see how they implement like the over the top ridiculous brawling that the game like explores, particularly like in the special moves and things like that. If we're going to see a little bit of the Scott Pilgrim approach, where it's just like over the top,
Oh yeah,
like kind of anime punches, but in live action. Because I think they really did a good job in showcasing and blending that. Like, despite it being live action, Scott Pilgrim feels like watching a comic book. Like, and there's no really other way to put it. And it feels like a comic book in a different way than, say, Avengers feels like a comic book.
And for anybody curious watching the Twitch stream, and for anyone wondering, like, well, where'd Zach go? So he just had to duck out.
He's a hungry boy, is what it is.
He had dinner, and our timing kind of aligned with that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But we'll catch him again. So for anybody watching, that's where Zach went. But before we wrap up, I do want to toss out one other bit of news that is related to what we're talking about. Netflix unveiled what they're doing with the Resident Evil franchise. And I think it kind of surprised a lot of people because we were expecting a live action adaptation. And what we're getting, and I believe this is what they were talking about whenever they were pitching shows, but maybe they've got multiple shows in production now that I'm looking at it. So they announced today that they're getting a CG adaptation of the Resident Evil story called Resident Evil Infinite Darkness. And
yeah,
it stars Leon and Claire, it appears, and it's a series, not a film. Which is interesting. Now, there's been Resident Evil CG movies, right? Like, there's been 2 or 3.
There was one for 4, wasn't there, that featured Leon?
Leon's been, I think, in all of them. And so what's weird about the RE movies is there's this, like, John Wick level of gung fu happening, and it's just ridiculous. Like, there's a scene that you can find in one of them where it's just, I think it's Chris and another character doing a gunfight, and they're like running in circles shooting at each other in close proximity, and it's just goofy. But it's like it's so like physical in nature that it's kind of a fun scene to watch. So I don't think we've gotten. Yeah, we did get a trailer. There's a teaser.
Yeah, I'm playing it now on the stream. So
yeah, it looks like Resident Evil, smells like Resident Evil.
I will say I didn't recognize Claire at first.
Well, the only reason I could tell is the jacket, right? And
right, but she has a distinct face. Like in the games, I recognize her, and that's one of the things I think that Resident Evil has always done really well is going for that realistic style, but still creating characters that I've recognized across different like graphics capabilities.
Yeah,
like particularly in the remakes
like
of 2 and 3.
Like Leon.
Yeah, and it's particularly in the remakes of 2 and 3. I've recognized Claire, and I've never played those games. I've only ever seen people play them on the PS2, PS1, and in this, it wasn't until I saw her jacket that I recognized her, and I'm like, oh, okay, maybe the budget's a little on the lower end because it's a series rather than a film.
I mean, Netflix has a tendency to toss large amount of monies at things. And
that's true.
It's all about getting the right group of people on a project, right? Like when they got the Dark Crystal together, which unfortunately was canceled.
Yeah,
which is the most baffling thing to me. But that production was like, the right people, the right situations, the right like putting money in all the right places. And so I think that's where Netflix really excels with their productions, is just getting funding to the right groups. Now, did that happen with Resident Evil?
We'll see.
Big mystery. But I wonder if they are still doing that live action adaptation.
Yeah, I don't know.
Or if this is what it became.
I was thinking about this recently with Netflix, and I think, unfortunately, they're going the same direction as, like, regular television is their most popular content is the reality content.
Yeah.
And that is the cheapest to produce. So they are making the most money and getting the most views out of the cheapest production. And The Dark Crystal, despite being critically acclaimed and well-watched, was just very expensive to create.
Yeah,
and
it was described as a money pit
and
in recent
I think
interviews.
Netflix is also running into a problem where they're releasing too much content too quickly. And so, you know, new content only gets like promoted on your like Netflix feed for about a month before the new stuff comes out and overlaps it and takes over. And so if you're like, oh, I've been meaning to watch that, been meaning to watch it, and then it's gone, and you didn't add it to
or
your
it's
to
been
watch,
replaced with something else. Yeah.
and you didn't add it to your to watch list, you just forget about it. And then suddenly it gets announced that the second season is canceled, and you're like, "Oh no!" And you know, and I think it comes down to is, you know, I see I see the top 10 trending things on Netflix, and well over half of them are true crime or reality based TV.
Like when Tiger King came out and such.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Netflix are moving forward on their live action adaptation, because when the script was put out, they talked about something the Children of Wesker, and it was supposed to have been produced by somebody, and like so that might still be in production, because this is talking about their synopsis that they revealed recently. This is back in August. They were talking about the kids of Wesker moved to a place called New Raccoon City, which presumably is like Raccoon City rebuilt. And so that is, I think, still in production. But they did say that, you know, we're getting this CG series that definitely has, you know, the right characters at least.
I feel like that's similar to
it's more Resident Evil. Sometimes Resident Evil is garbage, and I'm fine with it.
I feel like that's similar to like building a city and calling it New Chernobyl.
Yeah.
How many people are going to actually move there?
Right. So I don't like Resident Evil is another one of those franchises that I think is going to get another explosion of popularity when Village comes out.
Yeah, it's one of those things
like,
too where if you just
we'll
accept the ridiculousness of it, you have a good time.
Yeah. I like the vibe of most Resident Evil games, but I like it when it's mixed with that like actual horror. Like I think Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 7 are like perfect horror games. They're super good.
Yeah. Well, I know that a lot of people were kind of upset with 7 because it didn't feel like a Resident Evil game because they went first person and it was like a swamp family or whatever.
Until you play it. When you actually start interacting with the mechanics built in that game, it feels like traditional Resident Evil really, really good.
Yeah, aside from it being first person.
Yeah, like that was the articles I remember seeing that got me to be like, okay, I'll go pick it up. Is they're like, no, this feels like a Resident Evil game. It just looks different.
Yeah.
I love it, man. I really like Capcom. I think they're one of the best developers we have right now on the planet. And their franchises just like make me so happy. So we'll see. But yeah, so Joe, if people wanted to interact with Forever Classic Games, where might they do that?
With Forever Classic Games, they would go to foreverclassicgames.com. And then they would find us on Twitter. Is it Forever Classic X Games?
Forever X Classic.
Forever X Classic on Twitter.
Yep. And then email is theforeverclassicpodcast@gmail.com.
Yep. If you wanted to follow me and what I'm doing, I am at the Daddy Gamer on Twitter, Daddy Gamer YT on Twitch, and Daddy Gamer Reviews on YouTube.
And you've been getting pretty good numbers on Twitch here recently, yeah?
Yeah, I've been, I mean, relatively so, I guess. Recent months have shown an increase of regular subscribers to about 8, and an average of viewership of like 4 to 8.
That's cool.
Some of our more popular content is when Lily and I just do like an experiment together. Like we literally streamed her science class this last week, and a ton of people showed up to just watch us put this kit together of this like mechanical sweeper, and like do an experiment with watercolor and salt. And people were saying like people were walking away from the stream saying, I learned something out of this today. That was fun. And like experimenting with stuff. But with some of that growth, I decided to invest some time into building up the assets. And so now the channel points instead of dad jokes are now Birkin stocks that you can then spend your stocks on some rewards, and those rewards now have custom emblems that cool dad is a pair of sunglasses, I'm proud of you is a thumbs up, and story time is a book, and if you're a subscriber, you get the subscriber badge is actually a drawing of a unicorn that my daughter drew in Photoshop all by herself. Yeah. And so, just kind of like leaning into like the theme of the channel and having fun with it and trying to draw out that, like, this is what it's about.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
You can do all the fun, wholesome stuff there, and then when you want to get more serious about certain topics or cover something that's a bit more mature, come hang out with us.
I mean, I might still do Dead Space on Daddy Gamer, because it has kind of been a theme where we do a Halloween episode or stream a horror game of some sort. And I just do that on my own after hours or whatever. So it's definitely like less family friendly in that sense, but I don't know. I haven't decided yet. I might just go with Dead Space 2 on here, which could be just as fun.
We'll definitely have some sort of horror content at some point this early winter, because I always do what I call the Dead of Winter streams, which are traditionally horror titles.
That's the name of a horror board game.
Is it really?
Yeah, okay. Dead of Winter. It's a zombie survival setup.
That's cool. But I've been doing those streams for 3 or 4 years now, and they seem to be really fun. I really like it. And basically, I just sit down and try to play an entire horror game from beginning to end. So I did Dead Space 2 and 3, I think, last time. Yeah. And then the time before that was like Resident Evil 5, and I don't know. I don't know what I'm playing yet this year.
Coming up in November, I will also be doing some sort of charity stream again. I've done one in
Extra Life is definitely in the cards for us.
I don't know, like, so I've been doing it through one year was a family member who lives on a tropical island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. They got hit by a typhoon, and so we raised some money to help that community rebuild. The next year was through charity called Speed the Light, and their like main focus is like human trafficking. Cool. But specifically, it was actually this specific give was for building wells for clean water in Kenya. And so that was a big push for me. Like, one of the things that has always kind of kept me like humble in terms of like when I start to like feel down about life, I'm like, I can always kind of remind myself, well, at least I don't have to walk 6 hours to get water and then have to carry it back home. 'Cause with all the amenities and technology we have in this day, there are still people on the planet that don't have access to clean water. And so that's something I feel strongly to. So depending on what Speed the Light does this year, I might stick with Speed the Light and do whatever they push in. But if they don't, I might go back to the clean water thing and find some other clean water like thing to do.
That'd be cool.
But, at the same time, human trafficking is always a good thing to like try to like raise funds and fight. And they've seen a lot of success in that, sending people in to like rescue people caught in that.
That's good.
But so that'll be coming up in November at some point. Last year I did a 24 hours. I'll probably do that again. But this time I will have like a space to do it in, and my family won't have to vacate our living room. Yeah. My family won't have to vacate the entire living room for 24 hours straight. I can just be in my office and go in and out as needed.
That sounds cool. I'm sure that we'll have some Extra Life stream stuff later on. Usually I help out Andrew for a few hours, whether it's, hanging out with him, playing on his stream. But as far as marathon streams go, I've been more leaning into the 12-hour than the 24-hour recently. I think those are a little bit more fun for me. But so the Dead of Winter thing will happen. That will probably coincide with some Extra Life stuff. I would love to do more charity work in general, always.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess if you wanted to talk to me specifically, you could find me on Twitter at AC McCumbers, and everything else is predominantly through the Extra Life thing right now. I'm working on commercials, and so we're gonna have ads here pretty soon, which means that if you don't want to hear ads, you can pick up the ad-free version on Patreon. And that also, for the first little bit, we're gonna do ads completely for free for just people we like, and the goal is to do similar things, but specifically for games individually or companies that want to promote specific games individually. And so I want to make it just another way to recommend things to you guys. But again, if you want to catch that ad free, it's like $3, I think, currently to get our stuff ad free.
Nice.
And those will start having files soon.
All right. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. TGS is a good look into. Bad. It's a good, more in-depth look into things we already knew about, which is always nice to see. So, it's not necessarily...
And I'm sure there's stuff we missed.
Absolutely. Because I haven't really been following it until today. And so I was just kind of like looking at the highlights. Try to grab a couple of smaller things, but...
I was just watching people that I knew do global work in games, so I was like following certain channels. That way I knew like if something big came to the surface, I would know about it.
Oh, one thing I did notice is Xbox really put forth a strong showing this year, because I know that they've always struggled. They've always struggled in the Japan gaming space because Sony and Nintendo... Yeah,
we didn't talk about that, but they did good.
Yeah, Sony and Nintendo are so prevalent, and I think that them putting forward like a strong like showing, particularly over previous years, I think was a good move on their part. But we'll see. Like,
their big game that was an update to Microsoft Flight Simulator that specifically focuses on Japanese regions. So they just made those areas more detailed.
Ooh, I might have to fly.
And so,
fly those.
Yeah, that's really cool for anybody of us that's like really in love with the culture of Japan, but it's easier to load into Flight Simulator than actually take a plane.
Well, you can also...
Other than that, it was a lot of like similar footage.
Yeah. Also, when are you ever gonna like jump in a prop plane and fly over like Mount Fuji?
Right. Different experience as far as what you can see.
Yeah.
But yeah, so for everybody at home, thank you so much for listening to the Forever Classic podcast. We really appreciate anybody who interacts with us on anything we do. I think that what we do is really cool and really meaningful in certain aspects. And so we've got a lot of things going on, and we're going to keep on going on until we can. So
sounds good. Have a lovely evening, everybody, and we will see you again soon. If not, for sure next week with our next weekly discussion. But until then, play some games, relax, and have a good time. Stay hydrated.
Yeah.